Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 23rd session of our Leading Together series. In these 30-minute learning webinars, WestEd experts are sharing research and evidence-based practices that help bridge opportunity gaps, support positive outcomes for children and adults, and help build thriving communities. Today's topic, realizing the potential of post-secondary mathematics. Our featured speakers today are Amy Getz, Senior Program Associate for Mathematics Education at WestEd, and Ann Edwards, Senior Director for Mathematics, Science, and Engineering. Thank you all very much for joining us. My name is Danny Torres. I'm Associate Director of Events and Digital Media for WestEd. I'll be your host today. Now, before we move into the contents of today's webinar, I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce WestEd. As a nonpartisan research, development, and service agency, WestEd works to promote excellence, improve learning, and increase opportunity for children, youth, and adults. Our staff partner with state, district, and school leaders, providing a broad range of tailored services, including research and evaluation, professional learning, technical assistance, and policy guidance. And we work collaboratively with post-secondary faculty, department chairs, deans, and others to transform systems and teaching practice. Now I'd like to pass the mic over to Amy. Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Danny. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Realizing the Potential of Post-Secondary Math. Ann and I are very excited to talk to you about this today. It's something that we are very passionate about. And we're going to be giving a brief overview of the challenge and the promise of post-secondary math. We'll be reviewing some evidence-based strategies, and then we'll wrap up with some recommendations for actions. So first of all, the challenge and the promise. I suspect that most of us know that all too often math is a barrier for students, and that that's something that we have been working very hard to change. And as we are trying to change that, there are sort of three areas that we at WestEd focus on. Is that we still have traditional structures that are based on course pathways that were designed to lead to calculus, regardless of a student's interests or needs. We have developmental education sequences that hold students back from making progress towards their post-secondary goals, whether that's a certificate or a degree. And too often we see instructional practices and student supports that are ineffective. So to dig into that a little bit, what we want to see are math pathways aligned with program needs. On the left, the graphic kind of shows the old way of doing things. The student, regardless of what kind of program they were in, got funneled into college algebra as a catch-all. And the problem was there's two things that were a problem there. One is that college algebra has some of the highest failure rates of any college course. And second, the content of college algebra is not necessarily very relevant to many students' needs and the things that they are going to see in their programs and in future careers. So what we have been moving towards over the last decade is something that's more like what we see on the right, where there are gateway college mathematics courses aligned to different programs of study. And by gateway, we mean it's the first college credit math course that a student takes where the credit applies to their certificate or degree, the needs of their program. Now, we've made huge progress in this area. Almost every college, I think, in the country now has at least 2 gateway courses. But the areas where we still need to work on this is around advising students into the right courses, making sure those courses are high quality and have modernized content, and making sure that the applicability to a degree is consistent and predictable across institutions. And one other problem we still see is that many institutions require an algebra prerequisite for statistics, which has really been shown to not be necessary. So once we have math pathways in place, the next big structural reform that gives us the huge boost in student success is allowing students to go directly into those college level courses with supports. And this is as opposed to students going into prerequisite developmental math courses, which do not earn college credit and do not apply to their program requirements. So here we see some examples of data that have come out in the last few years. So as you can see from Louisiana Board of Regents, these are the institutions across the state of Louisiana. Between 2017 and 2021, about 14 to 20% of students who were referred to developmental math earned college level credit in 1 year. That jumped up to 30% in 2022 when the colleges started implementing co-requisites, but it really jumped in 2023 up to 52% when the institutions went full scale with co-requisites. We have very similar data in Tennessee. This is from the Tennessee community colleges. Before co-requisites were implemented, 13% of those students referred to DevEd were earning college level math credit in a year. That jumped up to 57% when they went to a co-requisite model, and similar results for English. So I want to just dream a little bit here. Let's suppose we really bought into these reforms and implemented them across the country, in every institution and every student. Based on research, we know that in a given year, around 672,000 students are referred to DevEd. Now that means for both math and English, but it's a fairly small percentage of students that only need English developmental education. So those students are represented in the middle there, those dots, the blue dots. Now, if we take the Tennessee results, if they were going into the developmental prerequisite mathematics courses, about 13% would succeed in getting college level credit in a year. About 156, 157,000 students. But if we apply the success rates under co-requisites, that jumps up to over 383,000 students. That is a change of over 226,000 students. That's over 226,000 lives where students are having more success and moving more quickly towards their goals. Now I'm going to go back for a minute to this slide. When I look at this and I see 52% success versus 14 or 57% versus 13%, I just don't know why we wouldn't do this. And this data is consistent across a number of states, numerous institutions across the country in all sorts of contexts. What we see is consistently between 50 to 60% of success rates. So is that good enough? No, 52% is not that great. I want it to be better. And that's one of the things that I get most excited about this is what we've also seen in the last few years is that once institutions have implemented those two key structural reforms, it sort of creates this foundation of student success. And it clears the way for them to think about how do we get even better? How do we refine our practices and implement more effective strategies around other issues like instruction, assessment, course policies, and student supports? And these are the things that really get at the student experience. And that's where I really get excited because I do not want students to just be getting through their math course and checking it off as a compliance issue. I want them to thrive and experience success and feel empowered by their math. So I wanted to share this quote with you. When I go into this course, I feel really smart. I have several classes where I've missed class, but I've never missed this class. And I don't intend on missing it because I love it so much. Now, I want you to imagine, let's say you took this quote and showed it to people around your institution, maybe some family members, some friends, your kids, and asked them, what kind of course do you think this student is talking about? How many people would say math? Unfortunately, I'm guessing not a lot. And this student she's actually talking about a statistics course that she got into because her college implemented accelerated math pathways. This is what I want students to experience. And it is also true that many, many students come in with some really bad experiences in math. And I hear a lot of higher ed people sometimes saying, well, if K-12 would just do their job, we wouldn't have to worry about this. And I don't agree with that. But the real point is we have the students we have. Whatever their previous experiences are, they're walking in and we have the opportunity to change that. And that's why I wanted to share this quote, if I can advance the slide. Um, I absolutely hated math, and now it's becoming fun. I took Algebra 1A in high school 7 times. I dropped out of high school because I didn't understand math, and now I walk next month. I got into Sam Houston University. A lot has changed because of this class. We could make our math programs be the reason that students succeed and not the reason that they drop out. Now, some of you, maybe all of you, are thinking, I've heard this before. And yes, Anne and I have been talking about math pathways and co-requisites for a long time. So you may have heard it before. And that's kind of our point here today, is we know what to do. We have lots of evidence. We have lots of data showing us what is effective. We know how to do it because that's what we've really learned over the last 10 years, is how to get more effective and more efficient at implementing these reforms. What we need is the will to see this through so that we take all of our collective caring about student success and organize it around action that will make sure that every student succeeds in our post-secondary math classes. And now I'm going to turn it over to Anne.
Thank you, Amy. That was really powerful, outlining the challenges and especially hearing directly from students about what they want and need in their mathematical learning in college. I'm going to turn now for a little while to tell you about what the evidence tells us works. Across states and institutions, a clear body of research has emerged showing that aligned math pathways, as Amy talked about, as well as removing key structural barriers to momentum, as well as instruction that fosters belonging persistence, dramatically improves student outcomes in mathematics and also in student success more broadly. So over the next couple slides, I'm going to walk through each of these core evidence-based strategies. All right. So for decades, as Amy said, post-secondary math education has really centered on a single dominant pathway, the algebra route to calculus. For STEM majors, this pathway is essential, but for many, if not most programs and careers that our students are in, this algebra focus sequence is not aligned with the quantitative skill and knowledge that students actually need. Recent Gallup polling from December 2024 gives us a useful window into this issue. It found, broadly speaking, that most adults do think math is important. 95% of adults say math skills are important in their work lives, and 96% say math is important in their personal lives. Employers think math is important too. In that same Gallup poll, 85% of managers said that they wish their employees had stronger math skills. And they called out financial math in particular, but other areas of mathematics as well. And we know from other research that employers consistently emphasize the importance of mathematical practices and dispositions, including things like critical thinking and reasoning, interpreting quantitative information, and communicating that information clearly and precisely, problem solving, and persisting through complex tasks. However, despite the importance of math for most adults and employers, this Gallup poll and others have also reported a relevance gap, and in particular, a relevance gap when it comes to school math. 4 in 10 adults wish they had learned more practical math skills in school. And amongst adults who said school math seemed unimportant to them, 81% of those folks said they had to study, said the math that they had to study felt more advanced and thus irrelevant for anything that they actually do in their real lives. And perhaps most importantly for our current conversation about post-secondary mathematics, only a third of young adults aged 18 to 24 think math is important in either their work or personal lives, which is a much lower proportion than older Americans. All of this says to me that the math that our students have experienced and are experiencing now is not useful or relevant to them, or at least not as useful and relevant as it should be. So then what do we do? Offering students with high quality, rigorous, and aligned math pathways, such as quantitative reasoning or statistics. And I'm just going to show you the same graphic that Amy showed you before, is a proven strategy for providing greater relevance and connections to students' interests and goals. And this is why we are increasingly seeing that degree programs are requiring these courses instead of calculus. So, for example, the social sciences, psychology, nursing, they are increasingly looking to statistical reasoning coursework as being a requirement for their degree programs. And the humanities also are increasingly expecting students to interpret information presented in quantitative formats. And that requires learning data literacy and quantitative decision making that is often found in QR courses, quantitative reasoning courses. So, why does this work? Well, when students have opportunities to learn math that is aligned to their interests and goals, they engage more deeply and they persist, which leads to higher rates of completion. We have seen this play out in the Carnegie Math Pathways, which is a developmental math reform effort here at WestEd. In Carnegie Math Pathways, or we call it CMP, we focus on supporting institutions to implement math pathways like QuantWay and StatWay. And in the colleges and universities implementing QuantWay or StatWay, we see a threefold increase in successful completion of college credit-bearing mathematics. And this is reflective of the overarching evidence of the success of aligned math pathways around the country. The experience with CMP, along with many of those other efforts around the country, shows us that aligned pathways can and do make a really big difference for students. But students also need structures in place that help them maintain that momentum and avoid unnecessary barriers. One of the most effective structural reforms is direct entry into college level math with co-requisite support. And Amy talked about this before as well. And the evidence from states is compelling. She showed you Louisiana, gateway math completion rose from less than 30% to 52% as co-requisite models fully scaled. And in Tennessee, we saw completion increase from 13 to 57% after systemic implementation. Those are really impressive numbers. And as Amy pointed out, it's not good enough yet. But these gains align with national research showing that students are far more likely to complete their gateway requirement when they enter into college level math directly, removing those prerequisite course sequences that so many students have been placed into. And when they enter into college level math directly, they are offered support through co-requisites, that's just in time, rather than having to go through sometimes multiple courses of developmental mathematics. In addition to that, structural barriers also appear in credit applicability and transfer processes. Of course, this is a broader issue than in just math, but it's particularly important in math because those credits are often so hard won by students. Federal analyses show that when students transfer between institutions, they lose more than 40% of the credits they have earned on average. That loss of momentum is not math specific, but that just demonstrates the scale of the challenge here. Research from the Aspen Institute, CCRC, and others point to some reasons why this happens. Articulation agreements are often inconsistent, course equivalencies can vary across institutions, and degree requirements shift when students transfer or change majors. And so when institutions lack these coordinated structures, a student might complete a statistics or a QR course aligned to their intended major, only to find that it doesn't satisfy the requirements after a transfer or program change. That not only slows their progress and undermines their confidence, it is demoralizing. So to sustain momentum, institutions need to put structures in place that make direct entry into college credit math courses, and in the correct college credit math courses, the default. They need to ensure that completed math courses apply to the degree requirements, and they need to provide clear, predictable transfer pathways, especially for QR and statistics. When these kinds of structures are in place, students can better stay on track, they can avoid repeating courses that waste their time and money, and they gain the quantitative competencies that their programs and careers expect. Align math pathways and reducing structural barriers like this open doors, but really we know the rubber meets the road in the classroom. Instruction shapes students' everyday learning experiences in mathematics and determines really whether they feel capable of succeeding in math, which serves them not only in that course but beyond. Our work in the Carnegie Math Pathways has shown that students' sense of belonging, agency, and capability strongly influences their engagement in course completion. Instructional designs that include collaborative learning, productive struggle, and high expectations paired with high support consistently lead to higher persistence in gateway math. If you know our work from before, we address these kinds of issues or these kinds of needs through what we called an area called productive persistence. And we've recently updated our earlier work with a new framework that we call CIRCLE. And I'm going to show you this now. The Cultivating Inclusive and Resilient Communities of Learning Framework, CIRCLE. CIRCLE is an update based on the latest research and insights from psychology and education experts, as well as our work with experienced educators. CIRCLE resources support educators in creating positive learning environments and classroom communities for their students that enhance their confidence, their sense of belonging, as well as their know-how about how to successfully navigate and participate in post-secondary education. I also want to take a moment here to mention the great work of our partners at Motivate Lab. Their research shows that students' beliefs, such as their sense of belonging, growth mindset, and sense of purpose, meaningfully affect their academic performance. They've shown that brief, well-designed activities that help students connect coursework to their personal goals or that normalize academic challenges can improve student engagement, especially for students who have historically been underserved in mathematics. So, across the work of Motivate Lab and CMP and lots of others in the field, three instructional principles stand out. First, belonging matters. Students persist when they feel they are part of a supportive learning community. Second, mindsets matter. When students see struggle as a normal part of learning, they remain engaged and they persist instead of shutting down. And also help seeking matters. Students seek support when classrooms communicate psychological safety and high expectations for them. And while these are general principles that are good for any classroom, this matters in particular in mathematics, where so many students have experienced disconnection, feelings of failure, and anxiety in the past. Math instruction is not just about delivering content, it's about creating the conditions in which students can see themselves as capable math doers, learners, and thinkers. And so when institutions invest in faculty development and thoughtful course design, student outcomes improve, not only academically, but in students' confidence and identity and persistence. And these, like I mentioned before, these are capacities that are sticky. They will continue to serve them in future math courses and in their post-secondary education and in the workforce. So, over the last decade or more, as Amy mentioned, we have learned so much. We've learned a ton from our research and from our experiences on the ground, but we have a long way to go before we will see the kinds of changes in mathematical knowledge, skill, mindsets, and beliefs that we want to see in our students and, frankly, in society more broadly. And as Amy said earlier, we know what to do and we know how to do it. Now is the time to take action. And I'm going to hand it over to Amy to tell you about those actions. Take it away, Amy.
Thanks, Anne. I love that term sticky. So this is a very quick overview of some basic recommendations about how to take action. First of all, make the math department the agent of change. And I mean that as opposed to having a few faculty that go to a training or something like that. And the reason why is that change is easier with a supportive environment. It is also more sustainable when it's supported by norms, processes, structures, and policies. I think we've probably all experienced some dynamic program that died because the one person who really cared about it or really knew about it changed their role or left. So you really need to find ways to make sure that change is sustained. And of course, change has greater impact with larger scale. So your institution is going to have more success if your math department is moving as a whole. Secondly, establish policies and evidence-based practices. Now, notice I have in bold, support faculty. It is just not helpful or appropriate to just tell faculty, oh, you have to go make these changes. They need to be supported in these processes. In order to implement well-designed co-requisite supports, they need to be supported to establish new course policies, grading practices, and messaging that promote learning for all students, and supported to learn about and implement effective instructional practices, as Anne described. Sometimes I hear a lot about faculty resistance, and I always sort of feel like a lot of that comes from faculty not being well supported to make the change and be the agents of change. And if you think back to those quotes I shared, when I'm working with faculty, when I see them start to experience their students having that kind of success, they are very excited themselves. It changes the instructor experience as well as the student experience. And then, double clicked. Help faculty form partnerships with other departments. Here I'm focusing on working closely with advisors, tutors, and other student support professionals, because that helps build common understanding across those roles, and it helps share the experience and share the responsibility for student success. Those folks in student support roles have a lot of great information to share with faculty and vice versa. It also helps identify and remove barriers that limit student success and access to support services, barriers that faculty may never be aware of. And also, if we are trying to address some of those transfer issues Anne was talking about, that of course requires working with the other departments, like the partner departments that need those math credits. So this has been a really quick discussion. We appreciate your time today. And we hope that maybe you'll be interested in some additional information or just talking through some of these ideas. If you're going to any of these events, either Anne or I are going to be there. Anne is going to be at the joint math meetings. I'm going to be at the NOS National Conference, and we'll both be at the Achieving the Dream Conference. We also had this brand new, hot off the presses brief just out this week that talks a little more detail about some of the things we've discussed here, and it's something you could share with colleagues. And now I'm going to pass it back to Danny.
All right. Thank you, Amy and Anne, for a great session today, and thank you to all our participants for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. Please feel free to reach out to Amy and Anne via email if you have any questions about the work we discussed today. You can reach Amy at agetz@wested.org. And you can reach Anne at aedward@wested.org. And to learn more about our mathematics education work at Wested, visit us online at wested.org/focus-area/mathematics-education. And you can check out recordings of our past Leading Together webinars online. We've covered a range of topics, including literacy, assessment, special education, mathematics, and generative AI. We'll continue our focus on math education as well as generative AI in January 2026. To access our Leading Together webinar recordings or to register for our upcoming webinars, visit us online at wested.org/leading-together. If you're interested in learning more about Wested, you can sign up for Wested's email newsletter to receive updates about research, resources, services, and events. Subscribe online at wested.org/subscribe, or you can scan the QR code displayed on the screen here. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. With that, thank you all very, very much. We'll see you next time.